Good morning, everyone, and welcome and happy Friday. My name is Melissa Judd, and on behalf of everyone at Vector Institute, thank you for tuning in today. Today's session is really about optimizing your online presence, effectively communicating about your AI and data projects, and successfully connecting with the organizations that you want to work at. And next Friday's session, we'll be turning our attention to the natural outcome of having a great online presence, which is landing that interview at that job that you're seeking. And we're going to focus specifically on how to master the technical interview. So for those of you that have expressed an interest in participating in a follow-up one-on-one session for either a review of your portfolio or resume or to practice a technical interview, please note that we will be reaching out to you early next week to let you know if you have secured a spot. Now, before we dive into our session, I did want to thank our funders, the Province of Ontario, the Government of Canada through the Pan-Canadian AI Strategy administered by CFAR, and industry sponsors from across the Canadian economy. Now, we are obviously not all sharing the same physical space here today. I did, however, want to pause and acknowledge the Indigenous peoples on all the lands that we are located on, and specifically reflect on the land on which Vector is located in Toronto, what is now a meeting place for many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, as well as newcomers to Canada from around the globe. The land that we are situated on is a traditional territory of many nations: the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed by the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa bands, and we are very grateful to be hosted on this land. I would now like to take a minute to introduce our co-founders of Phase AI, who will be delivering today's webinar. We worked with Phase last year on a series of webinars and one-on-one sessions, and we had nothing but positive feedback. So we're really very delighted to have them back with us here again this year. A couple of words about them. Wojciech Gryk is an AI researcher and data scientist, as well as an alumnus of Oxford University, where he studied on a Rhodes Scholarship. In addition to founding and selling his own company in customer analytics, he worked with a number of organizations to research and build AI-driven products. Joining him is Andrea Yip, who is a scientist, designer, and researcher. Andrea has had an incredibly dynamic career and has worked on some projects such as helping biotech companies plan research missions to space. Andrea is an alumna of the University of Toronto with a Master in Public Health. Please join me in welcoming back Wojciech and Andrea.
Thank you very, very much, Melissa, for that wonderful introduction. It's great to be back as well. We're very excited to be working with such a wonderful institute like the Vector Institute and all of the students, interns, and the broader research community. For the next 90 minutes or so, I will be talking about a lot of different things, and Andrea will be helping me in terms of Q&A and in terms of coordinating any feedback questions that might come up. We try to make these sessions as dynamic and as responsive to people's questions as possible. So as I speak or as I present on certain topics, if you do have a question, please submit one via the Q&A interface. And Andrea will try and make sure that we get through as many questions as possible throughout today. I'll also stop at various parts during the webinar to actually answer those questions, basically at every major section. So Andrea, thank you so much for joining us and enabling all of this. And I will get started. So, perfect. So, so thank you again for joining us. As I mentioned, today, and as Melissa mentioned, today we're talking about building your AI data portfolio and effectively networking with employers. This is a number of important topics, all really about the start of the employment funnel. When you're reaching out to employers, when you're trying to build relationships with them, when you're trying to stand out among the crowd, these are the techniques and tactics and strategies that you should be using. So in terms of today, there's a number of areas that we'll cover. The first is an introduction to data roles. Believe it or not, even employers really struggle with understanding the differences between, say, a data engineer and an ML researcher, or a data scientist and a data analyst. And this is something that the easier you make it for them, the easier they make it for you as well. We'll cover recent trends in hiring so that you could understand a little bit about how the space is actually changing. It is, for better or worse, a very dynamic space when it comes to hiring data professionals. We'll talk about your data and I portfolio, which is, in my opinion, next to your resume or CV, the most important aspect of an application process to really stand out and build relationships. And then we'll talk about networking. How do you network online in a remote environment via LinkedIn, via email, via webinars, et cetera. And then, as Melissa mentioned, we've made time and space to cover interviews, recruiting strategy, portfolios in one-on-one sessions, which I'll cover at the very end. So before we actually dive into the content, we're curious, from your perspective, we'd love to hear, what do you need to put the most effort into preparing before your next interview? I'll just give you a few seconds to answer the question. Maybe we can stop the poll and see what the results are. Perfect. Okay, wow, it's across the board. So resume, LinkedIn, portfolio, technical interview are the top three, but it looks like it's a pretty even split, with maybe a little bit of focus on the technical interview. So that's great. Well, we're going to be covering all of that in this webinar and the next one. So good news for everyone. And of course, all of this can seem really intimidating. The wonderful thing is, when you actually start focusing and working through this, you'll realize that a lot of it is actually process. And if you've got the process down and you practice and you iterate, you're going to be very, very successful. So let's start with talking about the various data roles and how do you prepare for your future job. The way that we like to often think about this, especially when it comes to everyone who's applying, is just giving you the context from an employer perspective. About a year and a half ago, we were working with a company, let's call them DataCo, that was looking to hire a team of 4 data professionals: a team lead, a data analyst, a data engineer, and someone on the ML research side of things. So 4 very different roles. They had 6,000 applicants apply for these roles. And by the way, this was, again, a year and a half ago, when remote and global applications weren't as big a thing. And I think things have only gotten more intense since then. What was really surprising to us, aside from the fact that we were so overwhelmed with 6,000 applicants, is the fact that 1,000 people roughly applied for 2 or more roles. In some cases, we had people apply for all 4. And again, when you think about a team lead running a data science team and a data analyst, those are extremely different roles. Like the skill sets, while of course everyone needs to understand and know what data is and how to work with it, the actual skill sets and career paths are extremely different. And so that was the first surprise for us. Now, of course, a company like this can't actually sit down and interview 6,000 people. That's absolutely impossible, just from a time perspective. And so when it actually came down to the phone screening, where we actually hopped on calls, either ourselves or the hiring manager, we made it to about 100 people. And so this is the first thing, or the second thing I should say, that's really important. In addition to the fact that roles are so varied and confusing to people, you've got a 1 in 60 chance in this specific case to actually getting on a phone call. That's very, very small. The second thing that's important to note is, of those phone screened candidates, we had about 10 that made it to final interviews. So again, 1 in 600 when you look at the total applicant pool. Of those, we made 6 offers. So 4 roles, not everybody accepted their role. There were a whole bunch of reasons for that. But in the end, 6 offers. This is the funnel. And the reason that I bring this up and why the portfolio, the LinkedIn work is the resume optimization is so important is that, when it comes to reviewing 6,000 applicants, you can only have so much time that you dedicate to each individual applicant. And so one of the things that we often recommend here is actually putting yourself in the shoes of the recruiter, the hiring manager, the company, to make it as easy as possible for them to pick you. How do you stand out? What are the one or two things that you can actually do? And of course, number two here is, as you progress through the funnel, which we'll talk about in terms of what the actual steps look like, how do you actually make it easy at every step for the recruiter, the hiring manager, the hiring committee to actually say yes to you as an applicant? The first thing that we like to focus on here when it comes to different data science roles is the being aware of how varied and diverse these roles actually are. The first thing to note is what internal ML roles are. And when we say internal roles here, we think about the team members that are working internally as part of a small team, working on research, DevOps, potentially data engineering, etc. The first and biggest misconception that employers make here is that they think the machine learning research is the core component to every single data science role, whether it actually uses machine learning or not. If people aren't familiar, if the business team especially isn't familiar with these roles, that's what they're going to over optimize for. And so what we try to encourage employers and applicants to do is to emphasize the breadth of their experiences and to really emphasize how they understand the broader workflow processes here. For every hour that you spend working on ML code, you're probably spending several hours. Certainly the team is spending several hours on data collection, feature extraction, server management, monitoring, analysis, etc. All of that is very, very important to call out, both in terms of your experience, as well as in terms of understanding if the company is mature and aware enough to know that this is the case. And I will say, whenever we have candidates and applicants reach out to the companies we work with, and they have a deep appreciation for ML ops, data ops, or the underlying infrastructure and configuration of these models, they stand out just by virtue of mentioning that. The other thing that a lot of people tend to forget is that there are a lot of data science roles that are external in nature. And what I mean by external here is they're client facing, whether that's internal clients, you're dealing with the product managers at the company, or you're dealing with actual external clients in a consulting manner. And again, here, there are a ton of different skills and capabilities that you should emphasize to stand out. Requirements gathering, data translation or data visualization is huge, especially when it comes to presenting to executive stakeholders. Communications and storytelling, training. Data science is intimidating to a lot of people. If you can actually communicate well, and if you're comfortable working with stakeholders and guiding them through the data science process, that's another place where you will stand out pretty much on day one. And more importantly, a lot of these other roles, people tend to really struggle hiring for them because they don't even know what to call them or how to look for these candidates. So, and that's one of the things where your portfolio and resume will really kick in. And just to make this a little more real in terms of titles and roles, we like to think in terms of this 2x2 spectrum of internal versus external, as well as applied versus theoretical. And what I mean by applied here is, are you actually working on the core data itself, on building a product or something else? Or are you more theoretical in nature, working on algorithms, writing papers, and doing other things? And of course, tons of different roles, they all fall in, and many fall into various buckets here. For something like applied internal, you might look at, being an analyst, a data engineer, an ML engineer. Applied external, that could be a data translator or a solution engineer, where you're working with the sales team to build out a solution. I won't go through all of these, but the thing that I would like to emphasize here is the data scientist is a catch-all for many of these roles. And again, companies really struggle with this. So when you see and think about your career, I think it's very, very important to think, how do you fit into these different buckets, and what is the story that you want to tell about yourself, 5 or 10 years from now? What do you enjoy doing, and how does that overlap with the data side of things that you're focusing on? So, should I be a data analyst, a data scientist, an ML engineer, or something else? The other thing is there's new roles coming up all the time here. And of course, we won't be going through all of those roles and all of those details in this webinar. I think we'd need like a 90-day session at that point. But if you are curious, the webinars that we ran last year with the Vector Institute are a fantastic place to start. So the links are here. Feel free to take a screenshot and of course follow up afterwards as well. But you could learn a little bit more about how to optimize your online presence, the nuances of these different roles, as well as the broader structure of what AI interviews and data interviews actually look like. So all of that was theoretical. So that's great. There's lots of different roles, lots of different things that you could be doing. And, the first thing that I want to start off here is that this is, again, a very, very dynamic space. It's changing every year. It's changing every few months in some cases. And so I want to cover a few trends that are particularly relevant to the interview process. And I won't go through the interview process itself. Again, you have the link in your chat in terms of some of the other webinars that we've run. But all of this, the reason we like to bring up the interview process here in context to the recent trends is that, always put yourself in the shoes of the company that's hiring, the recruiters, the hiring managers, because these trends ultimately impact how you go through this funnel, how you build a relationship with people. And so there's 6 that are particularly salient for winter 2022. Some of them are trends that we're probably all getting used to now, but they're still dynamic in nature. And the first one is remote work. So again, this is one that, of course, has been around now for a few years. And but the reason that I want to emphasize it and bring it up here first and foremost is that number one, we now meet companies and candidates and employees that have literally never been to the office of their employer and have never actually physically met any of their coworkers. They've interviewed remotely. They started working via Zoom and Slack or Microsoft Teams or something else, and they're doing everything remotely. And this is really important for a few reasons from a career perspective. Number one, this is opening up a larger audience in terms of who might be applying for roles, but also how they're applying and how they're networking into them. Before, a phone screen literally meant you hop on the phone and you chat, and no one sees you, no one knows what you look like or where you are. Today, pretty much every single interview kind of looks the same. It's just the structure is a little different. But you're on Zoom or Google Hangouts on the phone for the phone screen. You're on Zoom or Google Hangouts for the technical interview, and so on and so forth. And so we do encourage people to really think about what that means. How do you want to present yourself remotely? Do you want to be professional? Do you want to? Do you need to invest in faster internet access or more consistent internet access potentially? I recently met someone who actually has like a full setup just for their networking. They've got a green screen. They've got the circular lights. They've even got a teleprompter. I didn't even know you could have teleprompters for a personal computer setup, but you can. And the important thing here is people are really investing in this stuff just to make sure that they are as professional as necessary, but also they're aware that every company has a slightly different culture here. So trying to meld into the culture that where you're applying, trying to do that effectively and being aware of it is really, really important. The second piece that's related to remote work is global competition and the Great Resignation. And this is a trend that is specifically, I think, really salient today. I mentioned Dataco and 6,000 applicants. That was North America. Today, we see applicants applying for certain roles all around the world. So in some cases, for the jobs that everybody wants, you might have 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 candidates applying, and they're coming from everywhere: Europe, Asia, North America, Latin America, Africa, et cetera. And so being aware that this is your competitive set now A, can be intimidating, but B, again, making sure you know how to stand out is important. The other piece from a recruiting perspective that's really important is this concept of the great resignation, or, there's different terms for this, but what we are seeing is that the actual companies that are hiring today are very overwhelmed. It's competitive on both sides. Remote work means companies are looking for talent everywhere, and talent is working for companies everywhere. And so it's not uncommon that we're seeing certain recruiters or hiring teams within companies actually trying to fill 10 or 20 roles at once. And so again, when you think about 10,000 applicants for a role times 20, I mean, how are you ever going to get through that, right? Now, the flip side as well here is if you have a niche specialization, if you're a hybrid data scientist, which I'll talk about in a minute as well, it means that you can find really, really interesting companies that speak to your specific combination of skills where people might not really be applying. And that's the other piece here that is important, is that, while there's so much fluidity in the market, it also means a lot of roles aren't getting filled, and being able to find those and network into them is important. One example of this is hybrid careers. And this is another trend that we started seeing, I would say 2 or 3 years ago, but is becoming more and more prevalent. The idea of a hybrid career is related to the fact that the data science profession is maturing and getting more nuanced in terms of the roles themselves. And hybrids to us are people who have a background or a skill set that is not related to data science, but is very important to a potential employer. So maybe you've spent 5 years working in customer service or a few years working in international development, and now you've decided to pivot into data science. Sometimes people get advice that they should hide all the things that they were working on before. And I hate this advice. This is like, I'm usually very flexible and saying, well, it depends on the situation, but this is one piece of advice that I absolutely disagree with. I think when you can come in and say that you're that you're a person with lots of experiences, and there's the data science skill set you have, but also other things that you're very good at, and when you combine them, you are a very unique and special individual, that is really, really powerful. For example, if you look at something like HR, we've met with lots of folks who have worked in human resources or maybe recruiting even, who now want to work in data science. And a growing field now that's very, very active and very difficult to hire for is people analytics. And this is folks who are comfortable and understand data science and data analysis, maybe even data engineering, but who also understand the challenges that large corporations have when it comes to talent, HR, and other things. Very difficult to hire for, very difficult to find people who have both. Another example related to the hybrid piece is folks who are new to Canada. And in a similar way, we find that, oftentimes people really struggle getting into their first role when they've recently moved to Canada or are just starting off their career after living elsewhere. And this is something that, again, we really try to encourage people to come into this and frame it as a strength. I mentioned the international development example. This was someone who had moved to Canada in the last few years. They had several years of experience in international development, and they were moving into data science. And of course, they got that advice of not emphasizing their international development background. And to me, this was shocking, because when I think about working in a difficult setting like that, conflict management, you know how to communicate with stakeholders, you know how to manage meetings and facilitate situations that are probably a million times more difficult than your standard corporate setting. So when you can come in and say, I can do that, and facilitate and analyze the data to actually come to a data-driven conclusion and help people understand why we got to that conclusion, that is an incredible range of skills that you could emphasize. And going back to mentioning the internal versus external roles, of course, a person like that, you might not want to, when you're applying for the ML research, that might be less relevant. But if you're applying for a consulting role or a solution engineering role or a data translation or visualization role, it's extremely relevant and extremely exciting to see candidates like that. So the other piece around hybrid data science is this other trend we're seeing around small and mid-sized enterprises and companies. And this is something that the Vector Institute is working on as well, and has some great programming around. But the thing I want to emphasize here is that 5 or 10 years ago, the companies investing in data science and ML research were typically larger companies with corporate research labs. They certainly had the funding to invest and explore and see what might come out of all of this. But that, again, the field's matured. And while those companies are still around and they're building big teams, the other thing that's happening now is smaller companies are diving into this. They know that that there's a place for them when it comes to building a machine learning driven product, or building a consulting arm that might incorporate data in some way. And two really important things here. One is smaller companies tend to be a lot more open to hybrids because they can only hire 3 people, let's say, instead of 30 people. And as a result, they're looking for people who have a varied range of experiences, who can do the subject matter, have the subject matter expertise, and who also can analyze the data or build a model or do whatever it is that needs to be done. And small and mid-sized enterprises, that could mean companies that have been around for a really long time, or it could also mean startups. You know, there's a lot of startups that are 10 or 20 people in size that are doing really interesting things. And the most wonderful thing here is, again, when you get a candidate or an applicant who understands why they want to be in that unique industry, why they're a hybrid, so to speak, and how they can contribute to the company's success across the board. The other thing that's really important here from an SME perspective, a small mid-sized enterprise perspective, is that a lot of them don't have the brand recognition that the bigger companies do. So sometimes they don't get any applicants for their roles. And that's another place where you could stand out. You know, sure, you know, if you want to work for a large company and compete with 1,000 other people, there's a place for you. If you want to also work in a really specific sector that is a Venn diagram, an intersection in a Venn diagram across 3 different things that you care about, there might be no applicants or no people that fit all 3 sets of requirements. So we always encourage people to explore both. And finally, you know, the question here ultimately goes down to, well, how do I stand out? How can I possibly put all of this into a resume or into a CV? There's so much I have to emphasize, so many different things. I have to get into details as well. And this is where your online portfolio really comes in. Of course, you need to have a resume. That's important, that's critical. And some of our earlier sessions from last year cover that in detail. You also want to have a LinkedIn profile because your LinkedIn profile is standardized. A lot of recruiters, hiring managers really like LinkedIn because the format's the same for all the applicants. So it's a little easier to quickly dive into the sections that that hiring manager might be interested in, whereas resumes can come in 1,000 different formats. But the other piece that's really important, and what we'll spend the next few minutes on, is your portfolio. How do you actually build something that is a full profile of you that provides enough detail for people to actually dive in and understand that you're a multifaceted candidate that will be extremely successful at the role you're applying for? Now, before I do that, I'll stop here just to see if there are any questions or comments that we should look into. So one of the questions that's coming up is, what trends do we see accelerating or changing or coming up in 2022? That's a great question. So, you know, one of the things that I will say, going back to our list, is I think 2 things are really, actually 3, that are gonna, I think, only accelerate. This idea of global competition and the Great Resignation, I think, is going to continue for the foreseeable future. The remote work is here to stay. It might even die down a little bit now that some companies are returning to the office or have gotten comfortable with a new setup. The Great Resignation, this is what's top of mind for every company we talk to. Everyone is nervous, worried, and it's hard to find great people. So that's going to continue. And I think related to that, because so many people want to work in data science, you're going to see more people entering this space. So this competition is going to continue there. Number 2 is, I think, the rise of these quote unquote hybrid data scientists is also very, very important and very relevant to keep in mind. The data science industry is still maturing. It's, if you look back to how software engineering developed from the year, let's say 2000 to 2015, you went from, hey, everybody wants to be a software engineer, to there's DevOps, there's SysOps, there's data scientists, there's software engineers, there's integration engineers, there's all sorts of solution engineers, there's all sorts of different roles. And so I would say the same thing will be happening in data science, but it's only starting now. And so as you think about how your skills overlap and where you want to be, this is really, really important. And then the third trend that I think continues to accelerate is around portfolios. You are going to see significantly more focus on people being able to deliver, because as people usually in spaces like this, when companies first start investing in them, they don't know what to expect, so they're a little more flexible in terms of who they hire or what they look for or what the results should be within a team. But now that we've gone through a few iterations of companies launching products that are data driven, or launching business units that use data, companies know what to expect, they know what to look for, they know what shortcuts they can take, but also what they need to invest in. So those are all things that I would encourage you to keep an eye out for. And I think roles will change as a result too. So I will, so I'll keep going here, but we'll definitely have more time for questions throughout this session. So let's talk a little bit about that portfolio part. How do you actually stand out and make it as easy as possible for recruiters to see that you are a fantastic candidate that will be extremely successful in your role. Here, this is where your portfolio comes in. And the first thing that's important is to ask is, well, what is a portfolio? Because it's not your resume, it's not your LinkedIn profile. A portfolio is typically a personal website where you have a number of different sections. You talk about your end-to-end projects, you talk about your capabilities, and you really try to write this in plain language, because a lot of different people will be visiting your website. A recruiter is typically not someone who has a strong background in machine learning. So helping translate what you do into a business context for a business user is important. In a similar way, if you're doing really advanced research, translating that and showing that you are able to translate that to other stakeholders is really important. And there's a few things that you want to focus on here. The first is feature your strongest products, have a consistent framework, show and describe your end result. And your end result here can focus on a few different things. This could be a video, it could be an app you've built, a data visualization. One thing that we encourage people to do, you'll see a few examples throughout the presentation, is don't simply write what you did, like show, don't tell. This is really powerful because especially if you're a good presenter, showing a video that's 30 seconds long will get you way, way further than having a 5-minute blog post that talks about everything in detail. Again, minimize jargon. And the other piece that's really wonderful about a portfolio website that you can't do with a resume or LinkedIn profile is you could have employer-specific customizations. So this could include having shorter summaries that are more business-oriented, but it could also mean having like a landing page or for specific projects. Like if you want to, let's say you really want to work in computer vision, but you're also happy to take any ML role. Well, you don't want to say that on the website. I want to work in CV, but I'll take anything, right? What you might want to do is have a portfolio page that's pretty general, but then maybe have a specific page where it's yourname.com/computer vision, where you have a landing page that specifically shows what you can do in computer vision that you send only to companies that are hiring for computer vision research or data science roles. And so there's a few pieces of content you want to feature here. The first is, again, you do want to have your resume on this. The second is your thought leadership, publications, and projects. And you'll see here, like having a layout like the one with Jen is great, because if I'm a recruiter or a hiring manager, I land on this page, I might want to read her blog, I might want to read her publications, or maybe just learn a little bit about her. So that navigation bar is really important, and thinking how people will navigate through your profile is critical. And this is, by the way, a very common mistake. A lot of people don't really have much of a navigation strategy or any ability to navigate their portfolio websites. So making this something that's possible and doable is easy and is important, excuse me. And what's beautiful now is with over the last few years, you could use Wix, you could use GitHub to launch pages without actually doing a lot of coding. So, we highly recommend doing that. In terms of thought leadership, I'll go through all of these different pieces of content, and then we could review a few portfolios together. But in terms of thought leadership, these could be blog posts, they could be guest posts that you've written elsewhere, whether it's maybe for your research lab or for a newsletter. And again, we also love it when people show talks, whether that's presentations that have been uploaded, or it doesn't even have to be a presentation that had an audience. Launch Zoom, record yourself speaking for 5 minutes on a topic you really care about. If you enjoy presenting and giving talks, employers love that as well. So they'll see that and they'll be able to respond to that. So we highly recommend that. Publications are a very common one, particularly within more academic roles and people coming from university environments. And publications here, again, very broad definition, right? Actual papers that are peer reviewed, that have been published, obviously are really important, but white papers or reports that you might have worked on, other publications here, there's this kind of gray area between whether it's a blog post or a publication. If it's really technical, maybe it's more on the publication side. And if you do have a Google Scholar page or profile, excuse me, or a Kaggle profile, let's say, those are things that you could link to as well, so that employers, they see, okay, you've published these 3 papers, those are really interesting. Well, they might want to dig in a little further, see the number of citations you have, et cetera. Doesn't hurt to make that easy for them. The other piece that is really, really important is project work. And project work is important, and I think becoming more important as time goes on, because a lot of data roles, again, 20 years ago, a data scientist was really a statistician or an analyst maybe, that would be analyzing data and reporting back. Today, these roles are so varied. Many of them are actually focused on shipping products and being part of a product team. And so a lot of employers are constantly looking for people who can emphasize their end-to-end projects, that yes, I analyzed the data, but I was able to build a really beautiful or important data visualization, or the model that I built was actually one of the best models built in this space. And here's how I measured that, the objective function or the accuracy scores or whatever that you have on this. So, emphasizing your professional projects, data competitions you've been a part of, even personal projects. I personally prefer to see an end-to-end personal project than, say, classwork or even academic work in some cases, because it tells me you're curious, that when you have a few days off, you actually like to work on product or on shipping something interesting. That's so exciting. That's really cool. It's really nice when you see people like this. Now, on the professional side of work, if you do go down this path, a common question that we get is, well, everything I worked on was confidential, or the data was confidential. I can't share it. And this is, so, first and foremost, this is a very common problem. Pretty much everyone who's done something for an employer has to struggle with this. And so there's a few pieces of advice we like to give here, if you'd like to include professional work in your portfolio. The first is, to the extent you have publicly available versions, obviously err on the side of that. The second is, a lot of employers, especially if you're coming out of an internship, or if your employer knows that you were only there temporarily, maybe you're doing a professional experience year or something along those lines, a lot of them know that you need a portfolio, and a lot of them know that you need to talk publicly about your work. So if sometimes simply asking for permission, you'll get it, and they'll say, don't worry about it, this wasn't a big deal. Alternatively, if that's not the case, a very common tactic is to de-identify and anonymize your work, or sanitize it is another way people describe this. So maybe you were working on a product recommender for an e-commerce company, let's say. Well, there's a lot of data sets out there that you can take and use to basically rebuild the model with data that isn't internal to your employer. That would be a very common strategy. Again, that might take a few extra days for putting things together, but it's definitely worth it if it means that you stand out. And finally, you could avoid sharing these links publicly. You might, what we see oftentimes here is people will have a password protected page where they might only share this with an employer, or a potential employer, when they're further down the process of actually applying for the role or whatever else. And of course, you still don't want to have confidential information there, but if you're truly uncomfortable about, say, your current employer finding a certain project that you've been working on your LinkedIn or on your portfolio, you can password protect things that way. Now, there's one last comment I want to make here, and specific to academic work. A lot of us have been in courses where we work together with maybe the entire class or groups on a specific project. And these often end up in people's portfolios. And in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's something you've worked on. If you understand it, then that's great. However, one of the things that as someone who reviews, again, hundreds of resumes on a regular basis, I start noticing certain patterns. And one of the things that I do encourage people to avoid is if you have if you've worked on a project with a class where, let's say, the instructor was walking all 50 of you or 100 of you through a specific data visualization exercise, what ends up happening on my end is I end up seeing 5 or 6 or 7 resumes or portfolios that all have the same project and that all talk about the same thing, the same tech stack, the same problem, the same objective function, sometimes the same results. And this obviously doesn't help anymore, right? Because now I'm at a point where it's like, well, I don't know what you did versus what the professor did. And so in situations like this, what I encourage people to do is, if you're going to put academic work that was done as a large group project up on your portfolio, emphasize your role, number one. Number two, try to customize it. So, a very common problem that people work on is Twitter sentiment analysis. That's great. That's a really interesting, difficult challenge. If you put a slight spin on it, whether you're using a new type of model, whether you decided to change the objective function in some way, or you even labeled your own data set in some forms that maybe you weren't using in class, great. Now you stand out. Now it's a little different. I can see how you're thinking critically about these things. This also, by the way, applies to Kaggle competitions. There's a lot of blog posts that show the baseline Kaggle competition result, how you build the model, how you generate results. And again, I read those too. I'm curious about them. Those blog posts are interesting. But then when I see a candidate literally have this almost the same blog post structure and the same results, I don't know if they simply read what was on Kaggle and built that, or if they actually were able to build their own model and are able to build their own model. So just be very, very careful from that perspective when you're choosing academic work. So we're going to get into some really interesting examples now over the next few slides and next few minutes. One thing that I want to say, there's a lot of content here. We've been talking about a lot of different ways to present and show your work. One of the things that I will also say is try and have a structure that's consistent across all your projects. So, I care less about, frankly, what that structure is. There's a million frameworks, but it just makes it easier for someone who's visiting your website to quickly see, okay, you worked on 5 projects. Here was the situation with all of them, or here was the role that person played in each of these projects. That's really helpful. And you'll see within the next few portfolio examples, there's different ways to do this. Maybe it's describing your role, describing the problem, the solution, and then getting to the technical code. Or maybe that you start with a demo. If you have a demo for each of your projects, leading with that is beautiful, because again, it takes me 20 seconds or 10 seconds to watch a demo video, and it might take me 5 minutes to read what you were actually trying to achieve. So it saves me a lot of time, which I appreciate. And also, sometimes people lead with the code. That's really difficult, because now I have to look at your code. I don't know what I'm looking for. And so you want to start with that top-down strategy and have a number of these different, or have a consistent framework, across everything. And so let's talk a little bit about a few portfolios here, just what they could look like, and why we think these are fantastic portfolios. So the first one is Hannah, who has actually been fairly involved with the Vector Institute. Her portfolio is awesome for a few reasons. Number one, I love the layout. So you could see here, you've got all the links at the top. You've got links on the side for her specific profiles on Google Scholar, on GitHub, Kaggle, LinkedIn, which is great. But also you could see how quickly she dives into a visual component around her work. And what's nice here is, the first one is very technical around FPGAs. The second one is a lot more high level around butterfly identification. What I like about here is also the breadth of projects. So if if she's applying for a technical, maybe even hardware role, I might go into the first project. If she's looking to do something in a role where she's writing software or shipping product, I'm going to go straight to the butterfly identification app, which is what I did. And the other piece that I like about her portfolio here is, again, she's got that framework. You see the role, the problem, the solution, the impact, and everything is written in a easy to approach language. She's avoiding jargon, and most importantly, what I really like is the demo. So she actually has a video where you can just watch and see how her app for butterfly identification works. What's also really great is that butterfly identification, those two words already, I kind of know what she's working on, which is really cool. So this is a great portfolio that says more than it could possibly say just with text, by having those diagrams, or by having those images and screenshots and having this video. Going further, there's another example where she has work around agent-based modeling. And in a similar way, this really shows, this is a demo that you can see how the model that she built around tracking how a disease might spread within a population and how the population will survive and change over time, really, really helpful. I don't have to read the paragraph. I can literally look at the simulation itself and quickly get an idea of what's happening and get a feel for the fact that she's comfortable with agent-based modeling, which is really neat. And taking a step back now, so Hannah understands FPGAs, she understands agent-based modeling, she's comfortable with computer vision. Right off the bat, I can see she's a very, very versatile data scientist and or a researcher. And as a result, that's the pitch I might give to my internal hiring committee. Wojciech will go to his team and say, she's great for these reasons, check out this demo. It's easy for me to promote her internally now. Another example here is Sydney. So Sydney, in her case, what she's actually done is she's customized her GitHub page. And I love this. And the first reason I want to bring it up is that oftentimes when we ask people for portfolios, they send us a link to their GitHub. Nothing wrong with that. However, oftentimes, and the thing that is wrong with that is the fact that they haven't organized their GitHub in any way. So I go to their GitHub page, I see literally a chronological ordering of projects. So I don't know if chronological is the most important way to rank their projects or not. And a lot of them don't have readmes. I have to go and look at code. And this just makes it extremely difficult for me because number one, I might pick a project that you don't actually want to show off. Or I might pick a project where the code isn't commented very well. And I don't even know what the project's about. So maybe the only gauge of quality will be your commenting. So you can see how quickly this can fall apart. And what Sydney's done is she's put together a really nice landing page that guides me through her GitHub, that explains who she is. She's got a welcome message. She's also got a link to a separate website, which is her kind of more business-oriented website. And then for her projects, again, she's not linking to repositories right off the bat. She's telling me what she's been working on. And so I can choose the project that is most relevant to her. And of course, she's got published articles as well. So something like this on GitHub is really easy to build. It might take an investment of a few hours maybe, but it's well worth your time. And what's really nice pushing this further is in Sydney's context, she's specifically focusing on, like when you dive into a specific portfolio item, you have a demo. You could actually, here on the right, the final model deployment piece, you could actually use her model and explore it in a little bit of detail. But in the meantime, she also walks you through how the model worked, why they built it, what was important, etc. And I really, really like that. And Twitter hate speech is a good example of what I mentioned earlier on, by the way. If you simply have some code here, there's a lot of places where you could learn and read about categorizing tweets. And so having something that's well structured, well formatted, a demo like this makes you stand out, because now I'm not worried that this came from a kind of an introductory blog post that someone else wrote. Another example here is Ryan. And Ryan has a slightly unconventional framework, but I really like it. He's literally, he says, here's the sizzle, here's the steak, here's the recipe, and here are the ingredients. I like this for a few reasons. Number one is I can literally count the sentences here. There are a total of 6 or 3 sentences in terms of the sizzle and steak that describe the project. And frankly, it's all I need. I know what the project's about. Now I can decide where I want to go. The other thing that's really beautiful, which doesn't really stand out until you go into into the discussion is, he actually built the training data set himself. And this is another place that is awesome when it comes to people standing out, because going back to my first one of my first slides, where the ML code is a small portion of everything that you work on when it comes to machine learning, but it's the part that everyone focuses on. And so when someone comes to me and says, I know how to build good, effective, scaled training data, I fall in love with them, because people who have spent time working in ML know how important the training data is. And right away, they have a very practical angle to their work, and one that covers a lot of areas that someone that doesn't have that experience probably will miss. Another example here is Brandon, and in Brandon's case, similar to Ryan, very, very short summary around the problem, the solution, the skills used, the languages used, and of course has a beautiful demo as well. And again, just another version or iteration of this. And you'll notice Ryan, Brandon, Hannah, in their cases, they all have slightly different frameworks. They all work. The point isn't that there's the right framework and the wrong framework. The point is that they've thought a little bit about how to stand out and how to make things easy for their audience. The last example I'll give is Jeff, and Jeff is a slightly different portfolio, also a Vector Institute alumnus. And the reason that I wanted to bring Jeff up is that he has a lot of content when it comes to blog posts, papers, presentations. So no demos in this case. Again, nothing wrong with that, right? What's beautiful though is he comes in and says, he introduces himself. He talks a little bit about the company he's working at now. He's talking about the lab that he worked on, and he links to it, which is great. In academia, sometimes when we're working for specific professors or research labs, we assume that everyone knows those people. That's not often the case, especially once you move to industry. So having those links, it's a small detail, but it's a very important one, because if I've never heard of Quade Morris, then I can click on the link and I can go and learn a little bit more about that lab. And then what's also important is for each of his sections, he's got different sets of content. He's got his blog where he talks about fairly technical data engineering work. He's got talks, he's got papers, and he's got videos of himself giving talks, right? So right off the bat, I can see that he's a very versatile person, probably presents well. If you watch the videos, you can make a judgment on that yourselves. And then the other piece that I like about it, because all of these are different URLs, let's say he was applying for a machine learning engineering role, where it's specifically focusing on large data sets and optimizing the infrastructure for those data sets. He might actually reach out to a recruiter with his blog post, because again, it's very rare that I see a bioinformatics researcher talking about different file storage and file systems, excuse me. That's cool. I mean, and I just haven't seen that before. So I'd love to talk to him already, right? Now, if he's applying for a different role, let's say he's now at Deep Genomics, maybe when he was applying there, he might have focused on his papers or his talks, depending on what he's doing there. So this is something that we encourage people to do, is have those deep links or those permalinks, direct links to these specific pieces of content. And I'll show you in the next section how you could actually use those to network effectively with employers. So just a few tips to conclude this section. Keep it simple, make it easy to find information, summarize your content. When you are sharing code or links, let's say to GitHub or wherever else, just make sure you're not direct linking to the code itself. Have a README or have a page that describes and contextualizes everything. That's really, really important. And again, choose projects that show the diversity and breadth of your experiences, particularly if you're very flexible in terms of what you want to do and where you want to work. And finally, practice. Practice your pitch, record yourself. This is another piece when I think back to the trends that are coming up. Remote work, right? And the global competition. Everyone is on Zoom or MS Teams or Google Hangouts or something else. And so you could get a free account and you could record yourself. You could see how well do you actually present, or do you stumble over the technical details? That's really important to practice. And there's a few ways to do this. One is write a script. You don't want to read a script when you're talking to your employer, but having it pre-written often helps solidify what you want to focus. Record yourself and watch the recording. If you're not happy with it, you can keep practicing, right? Pitch to a friend and have them describe your work. If they describe your work in a way you're not happy with, it's not their fault. It means there's something maybe missing in your pitch. And then also have multiple versions of the pitch itself. Have a 60-second version versus a 5-minute one. The 60-second version is what you want to start with, because sometimes a recruiter or will ask, but the project might not be relevant. So it'd be such a shame if in a 20-minute phone screen, you spend 25% of the time talking about an irrelevant project. And then have an explain like I'm five version versus a technical overview. The Eli 5 one, when you hop on a call with someone and you don't know their technical background, start there. And then I'll ask for clarification. Alternatively, if you're speaking to the hiring manager who has a PhD in machine learning, then you might want to do the 60-second technical version. And of course, do mock interviews. This is really, really important. And it's one of the reasons that we're running our one-on-one sessions. Nothing will go wrong there, right? Like the worst that'll happen is you'll get feedback. And ultimately that's how you get better. And my rule for all of this, when it comes to working with candidates or even for anything I'm doing, whether it's a client pitch or talking to an employer or whatever else, is never do the first thing, never do it first in the interview. Ideally, you should have practiced the answer, the pitch, whatever, at least once before doing it in an interview. Of course, you can't predict everything that'll be asked, but it's a good rule of thumb. So, perfect. We'll be talking about networking in a minute. Before I do that, I just want to look at what questions have come up here. Perfect. So the first one is people that only have small projects. So is it too late to make better projects if I still have 1 year to complete my master's? No, 1 year is a long time. And so you can definitely work on larger projects or more complex ones. You have lots of time there. And depending on where your master's program is or your coursework, this is a good way to combine the two as well. So for example, if you know that in the next several months, you're going to be applying for roles in natural language processing, and you're taking a course on computer science course, if there's any individual projects you could work on or choose where you do NLP, you could kind of combine the two as long as your professor is okay with it. Or if you're working on any independent research projects with your professor, that's another place where you can work on bigger things. The other thing I really want to emphasize here, though, small and big, it's not necessarily that small is bad and big is good. A big project on, let's say, Twitter sentiment analysis, where you spend a month working on something that a lot of other people have worked on, will not make you stand out, even though you've spent a lot of time there. The flip side is small, unique projects. If you spend this weekend, literally the next few days, working on something really specific where you learn about different types of word embedding models for BERT, let's say, versus Roberta versus Elmo, et cetera, and you just have a blog post on the differences and the pros and cons, that's something that you could do potentially in 12 or 16 hours. And right off the bat, small project, you're going to stand out. So, just the question that I would encourage you to ask yourself is, where does this emphasize my unique capabilities? Next question is around work experience in Canada. How do you recommend framing projects if the work was not done in Canada? Great question. So, ultimately, I think there's two pieces here. One, employers shouldn't care where the work was done. And of course, now the reality of the situation, some employers do, and that's unfortunate, frankly. What you really want to cover here is making sure that you are presenting in a way that speaks to the cultural context of your potential Canadian employers. What I mean by this is having a portfolio in English. Sometimes I see portfolios where it's a project that was built in a different country in a different language. I obviously can't read that. And now I could throw it into Google Translate or something, but again, now you're making me do a lot of work, and we're all now depending on Google Translate to actually translate things properly. If there's a mistake made, I don't know if it was Google Translate or you. The second thing here that I would bring up is different countries and cultures have different ways that of what a good presentation might look like in terms of, how to structure PowerPoint, how to structure your actual talk, assuming there's maybe a video or something like that. In those situations, I would say you might want to record a version of your talk that redo the presentation in a way that fits what Canadian employers are looking for versus employers elsewhere. Again, nothing wrong with what you've done anywhere else. I want to emphasize this. You should be proud of it. You should be emphasizing it. You've got some kick-ass experience elsewhere. Come in with confidence and just be aware of the cultural context. So the last question that I'll go through here, some entry-level roles demand 5+ years of experience. How can fresh graduates or candidates with less than 3 years of experience handle these kinds of job applications? Yeah, it's a great question. I think there was recently a joke that I came across. This comes up every once in a while, where I think in this case it was around crypto and blockchain, and I think it was a company looking for like 3 years of experience in Web3, and Web3 is a term that's been invented in like the last 18 months. How that, like, it's impossible. It's literally, unless you have a time machine, literally impossible. So I bring this up for a few reasons. Employers make this mistake all the time. A recruiter might not realize when a technology was invented or what's possible. And so, number one, if you think you are, if you think you meet, let's say, 70% or 60% of the requirements of a job description, I encourage people to apply. Just, be aware that this might be a concern the recruiter or hiring manager might have. So you might even want to lead with it when you're networking. Reach out to them and say, hey, I've only got 3 years of experience, but the 3 years of experience I have is specifically focused on what you're doing. Or alternatively, you don't want to count coursework and academic, at least when I say academic here, I mean classes. You don't want to count that as years of experience. But again, if you can contextualize why you're a good candidate, then that might be okay. If you've spent the last year and a half working on or let's say the last 6 months is probably more realistic, working on an independent research course with a professor, it's not work experience, but it's just as good in my opinion. Or if you've been working on projects on the side, if you've been freelancing or consulting or whatever, those are things that, again, they might not count as years of experience in terms of dates on your resume, but you can certainly come in and say, hey, I have more experience than you would expect. So I would definitely encourage doing that. Now, I will say one additional piece, and we've talked a lot about job descriptions in earlier webinars as well from last year, but the job description, also just be aware that if an employer has a lot of unrealistic expectations in the job description, it might also tell you a little bit about how much they actually know about the space or how comfortable they are with it. Sometimes, like for me, when I see a job description where they have 70 different programming languages and they're talking about more years of experience than is realistic, I can't help but wonder if maybe they don't know what they're looking for. And so just a warning for you, or something to keep in mind as you think about your next steps. Okay, so we will now jump into connecting with employers. You've built an awesome portfolio. You've worked on all these cool projects. Now the question is, how do you get the employer to be aware of you? And we're going to do we're going to role play this, so to speak, via chat. But before we do that, the one thing is, like, why network? A lot of people are intimidated by this, are not comfortable with it for various reasons. And I would say, there's a few reasons why you should do this. Number one is, if you're seeking a job or opportunity, it's a lot easier to do that by building a relationship than it is to just sort of click apply on LinkedIn or something like that. The second is, it might not be about the job application. So let's say in the case of the job description saying 5 years of experience, but you only have 3 years, but you think you're perfect. You might want to reach out to the employer and say exactly that. I have 3 years of experience. I'm very motivated. Check out this project on my portfolio. Would you consider me? Or I have a question about the job or whatever else. So those are things that you could do that will allow you to stand out and build a network and build a great set of people that you could be working with without actually formally just applying for a job every single time. Now, the thing you want to do when it comes to networking like this, however, is you want to be structured in your outreach. Number one is you have a clear goal. Why are you trying to network? Identify your best contact, right? Do you want to reach out to the recruiter or the hiring manager, or maybe the lead, the team lead, or something else altogether? You also want to keep this short. This is really important because sometimes I get messages that are 1,000 words long, and it's going to take me 10 minutes to read. And again, it's intimidating. I might want to help you, but if I might get distracted, someone might call me into a meeting and I don't have time to read this anymore. I forget about it. And make sure you have realistic and specific asks. What I mean by this is another pet peeve of mine pre-COVID was people asking me for an hour-long coffee. So I would often run a workshop or present about my startup or whatever else. And the next day I would have 8 messages on LinkedIn or in my email saying, I'd love to take you out for a coffee. Great. It's fun talking to people. I love meeting people. The problem is a 60-minute coffee, traveling there, you're talking 90 minutes. I now literally have to, my entire day would be coffees, right? And I have a job, I can't do that. So what I prefer a lot more is when people reach out and say, look, I have a specific question, or can we hop on a call for 10 minutes because I'm working on this project and you're working on similar things. Maybe there's a way to collaborate. Or maybe there's something I could learn from you or vice versa. Or here's a paper I read that maybe you haven't seen before. It might be relevant to your research. All of that just right away says, wow, you're doing me a favor. This is great. And it also tells me you've taken the time to learn about my needs. So, believe it or not, oftentimes people will reach out for coffees. They don't even know what my company does. And now it's just like, what's the point for either of us? Maybe you don't even want to work here. Maybe you won't like me. So it's put yourself in the shoes of the recipient and really try to make their life as easy as possible. So we'll go through a few examples now of outreach on LinkedIn, and so we're going to keep using Jen, who we saw her portfolio website. Or her hypothetical portfolio website. And Jen is a graduate student looking for a summer 22 internship. She heard about Healthcare Co, where Martin, who's a technical recruiter, was presenting about their conversational AI work for healthcare websites. And so Jen is thinking about reaching out to Martin on LinkedIn. And we're going to open up the chat here. And what we would like to do is we're going to go through 4 examples where Jen is writing a message to Martin, and we want to critique it. So I'll read the message, but feel free as you see it. Tell us, do you see anything wrong with it? Or alternatively, do you think it's perfect? Or maybe there's like particular strengths that come out. So Jen is writing, seeking a summer internship. Hello, recruiting team. I'm an AI graduate student seeking a summer internship. What openings do you have coming up for new interns? I'm interested. I'd like to gain experience. Are you free for a Zoom call? So in this specific case, I'll jump into a few examples here. Number one, this is a very, very generic message. So Martin might actually be receiving dozens of these. One comment that was made, Jen didn't share what kind of internship role she is looking for. Absolutely. Jen should have ideally researched openings and asked for a specific one. She doesn't say what she brings to the table. Absolutely. 100%. No personal connection, no resume or portfolio. Doesn't even address Martin. I love this. And that's actually the thing that we find here is this is a very generic message that could be sent to literally 1,000 technical recruiters today. And we're very sensitive to this. When I get a message that basically could be copied and pasted to every company out there, it tells me that, I don't even know if you are sending and copying and pasting this to everyone or not. So really trying to emphasize what you're doing, that this is even just saying, hello, Martin, or here's the job I'm looking for, all of that is important. So here's another example. Healthcare data analyst specializing in conversational AI seeking internship. I'm an MSc grad student at U of T, passionate about AI and big data. I saw your presentation. I have experience working on conversational AI projects and have been working with Prof. McData's Health Data Lab for the last 3 years. I'd like to join Healthcare Co summer internship program. What is the deadline for applications? I'm curious what folks think here in terms of whether this is good or bad, or anything that you would potentially add. Nice. Rachel, thank you. No links to the lab or project. That is definitely one of the, she could research the deadline herself. Definitely true. That's actually a really good point. If these are questions that are available on the website, or our employer profile, what you don't want to do is, your question represents you. Let's put it that way, right? So if you're sending something out that's a little broad or vague, the person's like, okay, like maybe they'll reply, but you're not really building a strong relationship here. Not using short forms, subject line is really long. That's definitely true. Be more professional, or wait, I'm not sure if that's a question or not, but the professionalism piece is a good one. I find that it really depends on the company culture. I find most recruiters are pretty open to being a little more flexible from that perspective, but it is definitely something you want to think about. And I remember when I was a student, I reached out to a professor and used their first name and asked if I could volunteer in their research lab. And they responded with, "My last name is X." And I was like, oh God. And I never worked with them in the end. Anyway, so those are ways that you can improve this. Certainly, think about formality, have links to your portfolio, and of course, have a more specific question. Now, here's number 3. Now we're getting a little more advanced. So healthcare data analyst, internship number. I saw you speak at Vector's recruiting event. I'm interested in applying for internship number 20933, third-year AI graduate student focused on developing NLP models for conversational AI. I've worked directly with doctors to train over 25 health-specific models. The internship's focus on using NLP in clinical settings sounds like a great way for me to grow my skills. Please take a look at my profile and portfolio. Are you free to briefly discuss the internship? Again, curious, is there anything you would change here, or are we getting to the perfect potential message? So Richard, Juanita, looks good. It's clear what she wants. Absolutely. The last question is maybe a little too direct. So we're definitely getting closer, right? And what I love about it is it does include links. It does include her specific experiences to the points that people are mentioning. Again, the subject line is definitely a bit long. The other piece that I would say here is, and I'll go to a fourth example with this, which we don't need to analyze in this level, but the one thing that or two things I would change here, especially based on the feedback. The first is direct links to specific projects if Jen has them for her portfolio. And the second is, are you free to briefly discuss the internship? Oftentimes I definitely try to have a clear ask if there's a specific question. If Martin can reply to her question directly in mail or in the LinkedIn message, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Sometimes you build better relationships by avoiding conversations. Alternatively, if she has a very specific ask, then that's definitely important. So here's the first example, or the last example. I feel free to share feedback, but I'll go through this one a little briefly. So in this case, we've shortened it a little bit and we've broken it out. The big difference between this and the last one, two differences. One is specifically, Jen tells Martin why she can add value. So her comment here, more importantly, my work on fine-tuning models for clinical settings likely has application to healthcare co's work. And she has a direct link to her work on LLMs, large language models. And so that's really valuable because she's getting a little more technical and she actually has a hypothesis on how she can help Martin or Martin's team. And, she could be wrong, and that's okay. The point is, as a hiring manager, what I really love is when someone she knows what we do and she thinks she can help and she's being proactive. That's really good. And you'll even notice here, like, hey, we were writing these, we thought this was the perfect one. You're right, for the folks who have been giving feedback, we could probably shorten the subject line and also we can have a clearer call to action in terms of, are you free to briefly discuss the internship? So one thing I'll say is there's no perfect answer here, right? But number two is knowing what you want and really driving towards that is really good. Making it readable, making it easy for the reader and recipient is really, really important. So there's another Zoom poll that we'd like to ask, because in-mails are you have to pay for them. It costs money to send them. So the question that we have for everyone is, should you send a connection request to Martin instead? You've never met Martin, you've seen him give a talk, but you've never actually interacted before. Do you send a connection request? Yes or no? Okay, so maybe we can show the results. Ooh, yes, 67-33. Oh, I'm surprised. I actually expected more people to say no. So that's really interesting. But it is a bit of a balance, and it's a bit of a trick question too, frankly. And the reason I say that is, connection requests are okay if you can summarize your pitch and request in 300 characters. One thing that I really struggle with is random connection requests. Literally, someone just adds me to LinkedIn, and I don't know why. Right? It makes it very difficult to know how I can help them. Sometimes maybe they'll be selling me something. Maybe it's spam. I just simply don't know. And so one of the things I definitely recommend here is random connections are okay. Summarize yourself in 300 characters. And then follow up. Once they actually add you, assuming they add you, follow up with a message. Thank you for adding me to actually broaden your what you're trying to do. Here's how I can help. And to Yi's point, he is a recruiter, probably likes to be connected. It varies, to be perfectly honest. It varies depending on the role, depending where you're coming from. But remember too, that networking here isn't just with recruiters. Like more broadly, this is now taking a step back beyond the specific example with Jen and Martin. Hiring managers often don't like being connected with in quite the same way, and researchers might not even be using LinkedIn as much. Again, don't ask for random favors. A lack of response doesn't mean a lack of interest. That's another thing that's really important here. Just because you sent them a message, if they don't reply, it's okay. It doesn't mean they're not interested in you. They might be overwhelmed. The thing about recruiters, again, thinking about this, is some recruiters get like hundreds of connection requests a week. They just don't respond to them. They don't have the time or capability to do so, and that's okay. Also, I want to emphasize all of our advice for in-mails here applies to emails and other forms of communication as well. Sometimes people have their email addresses available. Sending that same type of email as the in-mail is a great way to start building the relationship. So I'll just see if there's any other questions that have come up here about this. Okay, so what's your advice on creating a portfolio if you've made a career change into data after working in another sector for 10 to 15 years? Do you include this in past experience? 100%. This is that, as I was talking about folks who are new to Canada, hybrid data scientists, I think this is really, really important that you emphasize those things and explain why they're relevant to the job you're applying for. So you're going to have to be a little customized for each application potentially, but it's great. Consider a strength, be confident, and put yourself in the shoes of the recruiter. Why would they want to hire you given that experience? And there's almost certainly an answer, and a positive answer. What's your view on the ideal length for a resume? It suggests that if you don't have 7+ years of experience, your resume should be at most 1 page, but it can be difficult to fit everything in. Yeah, so I would say pick either 1 or 2 pages, and when it comes to, and make sure they're full. That's the first thing. What I really dislike is a 1.5 page long resume, because it sort of tells me you had enough to fill 1 page, or more than enough to fill 1 page, but not enough to fill 2. What you really want to try to get the recruiter to do is think, hey, this person has so much content about themselves that they couldn't fit it in the 1 page that they had, and they probably chose 1 page to make it easy for me. That's how a lot of folks think about this stuff. And so from that perspective, what I would definitely encourage here is fill 1 page if you can. Definitely sorry, definitely fill one page. If you go over to 2 pages, that's okay, but then fill both pages, and or use the layout as your friend here to strategically fill things up. The other thing here is, I think if you don't have experience when it comes to formal work experience, you could still emphasize projects, a volunteer work, and other things in your resume, especially if it relates to the job itself. And last, so I'll jump around a little bit here. Could you speak to the career trajectory of product managers and data science teams? How will the role evolve in the next few years? Oh, this is a great question, because project management and machine learning and data science is a very, very new area. And it's one that, first of all, requires a huge range of skills. You need to know product management, excuse me, and understand how good products work, how they're built. But ML-driven product design is very, very special and unique, because, you know, in traditional product design, products will have bugs, but they won't make logical mistakes in the same way a machine learning model might. They don't act in an unexpected way in the way an ML model might. They don't make mistakes in terms of a false positive or a false negative. And so from this perspective, what I would recommend here, at least for now in the short run, I think emphasizing the skills that you need from a data science perspective and the skills that you need from a product manager perspective, try to promote both. In terms of getting into this space, what the career path I typically see is people start more in like the data engineering or even solution engineering side of things. They start showing that they could collect user feedback or customer feedback, and then they start shifting into product management. And they'll usually shift into product management informally. So at their company, they might start doing things as side projects and eventually get promoted into that. But there's an exception to every rule, so be aware of that as well. However, I think of like that is one of the most exciting developments in this space, is companies are getting really thoughtful about this. What kind of platforms would you recommend we use to create a portfolio easily? You know, I would say GitHub is great. It comes with templates. If you know some HTML or CSS, you can definitely do that. Number two is around like if you're not as comfortable with tools like with writing HTML code or CSS, I would encourage potentially using Wix or Squarespace, like places where you can build a website basically by dragging and dropping things. If you are using things like that, just be aware that sometimes the websites might not look as good on mobile versus in a desktop. Sometimes they might take a really long time to load. So just test and make sure it's okay. Okay, so unfortunately, I won't be able to answer the other questions right now, but if we might have some minutes, a few minutes near the end, I'll also talk about how you can potentially get involved if we didn't answer your question, which is the one-on-one sessions. So if you're really struggling with your resume, or if you're thinking about your portfolio, or you just want feedback, alternatively, if you want to go through a mock interview, these are things that we're now offering with the Vector Institute for the next several weeks. There's two types of interviews you can pick from. The first is a recruiter interview, where you're going to be looking at specific portfolio projects. You're going to get a critique from us on your LinkedIn and on your portfolio. So you know, definitely, if you're working on that, feel free to bring that. This is great for people who actually have a portfolio, are working on that kind of initial start of the funnel in terms of how they're working with employers or trying to figure out where to apply and why. The second one is a technical interview. This is good for folks who have a resume already. Maybe you've even gone through a few interviews already, and you maybe struggled with the technical interview component and you're not sure why. We'll do a mock interview with you, and we'll give you feedback on what you can improve and how you can improve it. For that technical interview, there are three components, or there are three streams, let's say: a statistical data scientist, data engineer, and ML engineer, which you'll have to pick, and I'll talk about that in more detail. So just in terms of choosing, we'll include the link in the chat again, just so people can sign up. But just remember, if you are signing up for the recruiter piece, we'll want to see your portfolio, as well as understand your goals, because it's hard to give feedback without knowing what your goals are. And for the technical interview, you'll have to choose a stream, and this will be a role play. So we will pretend like you're going for a job interview. Now, the job interview is at a company that is building an autonomous grocery store. So this is a store that has no staff. It's fully automated via various types of machine learning. And the stream that you pick will inform the sort of interview that you get. So if you're going down the statistical data scientist path, we're going to specifically focus on how do you build statistical models to optimize the customer experience. I won't say more because then you can prepare in advance, and you don't want, in the role play, you'll learn about the specific exercise. The second one is the data and ML engineer. In this case, we'll be talking about data pipelines for machine learning and stats, and whether or not we should be building models serving APIs. And the third one is ML research. In this case, we'll be focusing on how would you approach a natural language processing task. Now, just one question that I just saw come up here: do you need to prepare for the technical interview? No, no prep is required. And in fact, in this case, I encourage you not to prepare, so you can get an idea of how well you would do thinking on your feet. No one will know how the interview went except the person that's running the mock interview with you. We don't share that information with anyone, so it's very low risk. You'll be able to see, just how this process works, where you struggle or maybe where you don't struggle, so that then when you practice afterwards, you'll know what to focus on and what to do. So, feel free to sign up for the one-on-one session interviews. We're excited to meet you and see you. And again, the link is in the chat, so feel free to do that there. What I will also say is there's a lot of content we didn't cover. We did share the links to the YouTube videos earlier, so you can watch some of the videos from last year if you want to dive into other topics we didn't cover in this session. If you have any specific questions as well that maybe we didn't cover, feel free to email us at hello@phaseai.com, and you've got our website there too, in case you want to see some other content as well. So thank you again, everyone, for taking the time. We have about 3 minutes left, so there's 2 other late-breaking questions that I will get to just to see. So how do you judge a candidate who has good knowledge but is unable to express it well just because they get nervous in an interview? Well, that's a great question. A lot of us get nervous, right? Generally speaking, unless the role specifically requires very strong presentation skills, it's usually okay. If we can tell that it's because you're nervous, right? If you're so nervous that you don't know the keywords and the technical terms anymore, then that's the bigger problem. But typically, we know this is stressful, right? This is hard for everyone, and so it's okay. The reason I say in client-facing roles, this might be a little different, is that if your job will require you to make and give presentations, and you're really nervous giving your presentation, then that's obviously something that we'll be sensitive to. And then the last question: I'm a junior in data science, but a senior with 10 years of experience in a previous field. How do I successfully look for and apply for a technical role? So I'll give you an example here of someone that we've worked with that had this same problem. They wanted to become a data scientist, and they had historically for maybe 6 years, so slightly less than you, but for 6 years they worked in logistics, and so they were familiar with shipping, with supply chains, and things like that. What they ended up doing was they actually they completed a master's degree in data science and analytics, specifically. And they also took a few coding courses on the side, like boot camps. And they did 2 things. Number one, they started working on a portfolio that was specific to supply chain data. So their whole thing was, again, leading with their strengths, right? I know logistics really well. I know how supply chains work. I found a bunch of really interesting data sets. And everything is about that. It's like, here's how you visualize supply chain data. Here's how you focus on building a model to predict issues in the supply chain. And then they ended up getting a data science role at a company that has a huge supply chain operation. It's like one of the biggest retailers in the world. Massive data team that's focused on supply chains, beautiful career pivot, and one where they actually were able to join in a less junior role because people knew, they're like, okay, yeah, you're technically entry-level data science, but you know what questions to ask. you know where to look for the details and all that wonderful stuff. So I encourage you to do the same. This applies to any field. You'll, of course, have to be strategic about which employers to work with. So again, thank you very, very much for joining us. Good luck in your search. We hope to see you next week, and we look forward to seeing you in the one-on-ones as well.